This is a compilation of over 2 hours of every DC villain explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with every DC villain explained in 20 minutes. DC has more villains than any other superhero universe, from street-level psychopaths to literal gods who want to delete free will from existence. And today, I'm breaking down 8 of the most iconic, starting with the grounded nightmare fuel and working our way up to multiversal apocalypse engines. First up, the clown who proved you don't need superpowers to become Batman's worst nightmare, the Joker. The Joker is either the most terrifying villain in DC or just a really committed theater kid who never grew out of it, and I can prove it's the former. He first appeared in Batman #1 back in 1940. An editorial almost killed him off in that same debut issue, but they didn't, and now, 80+ years later, he's still the gold standard for comic book villains. The Joker has 0 superpowers, no super strength, no energy blasts, no reality warping nonsense, just criminal genius, a complete absence of self-preservation instinct, and the ability to cook up toxins that can turn an entire city block into a laughing graveyard. But here's where it gets dark. The Joker doesn't want money, power, or revenge. He's a terroristic nihilist who treats morality like a punchline and social order like a stage prop waiting to collapse. The Killing Joke gave him a possible backstory, a failed comedian who had one bad day and snapped, but even that's presented as unreliable. He literally says his past is multiple choice, which means you can't psychoanalyze him because he won't let you. He's chaos wearing a purple suit, and his entire philosophy is an experiment. In The Killing Joke, he tortures Commissioner Gordon to prove that anyone can be shattered by one sufficiently bad day, that trauma destroys ethics, that Gotham's moral fabric is tissue paper. But Gordon survives. He refuses to break. He tells Batman to bring the Joker in by the book, which completely refutes the Joker's thesis. The joke failed, but he's still laughing. The Joker's not cosmic. He's never going to crack open the multiverse or rewrite reality. His threats are localized. Gotham, maybe Metropolis if he's feeling ambitious. But if one man with no powers can make Batman question whether his no-kill rule is sustainable, what does that say about the fragility of justice itself? The Joker is grounded, but his implications are vast. He's intimate psychological warfare elevated to philosophy, but at least the Joker stays in Gotham, unlike the billionaire genius who's been trying to murder an alien for 80 years and somehow still hasn't figured out that kryptonite isn't a personality. Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is either the greatest hero humanity never had or the most dangerous narcissist ever given a billion-dollar weapons lab. Before you roll your eyes, hear me out. Debuting in Action Comics #23 in 1940, Lex started as your standard mad scientist bad guy, but over the decades he evolved into something far more terrifying. A multi-billionaire CEO commanding economic resources and cutting-edge laboratories that rival any government on Earth, wielding influence that makes politicians sweat. He doesn't just fight Superman with punches. He fights him with press conferences, stock manipulation, and forcing the Man of Steel into impossible moral choices on live television. And I can prove it. Lex is one of the smartest humans in the DC universe. Super genius polymath smart. He designs powered war suits granting superhuman strength, energy projection, force field generators, and kryptonite-charged weaponry specifically calibrated to exploit Superman's one physical weakness. Some versions can absorb kinetic energy from attacks and fire it back amplified, or literally encase entire cities in molecular shells that block sunlight to starve Superman of solar power. He's turned himself into a walking anti-Kryptonian weapons platform because if you can't be born a god, you build the tools to kill one. But here's where it gets complicated. Lex doesn't just want to beat Superman physically. He wants to prove that human will and intellect are superior to alien godhood. He views Superman as an unearned intrusion, overshadowing human achievement. An alien who didn't work for his powers showing up to make every human accomplishment look insignificant by comparison. To Lex, Superman's very existence is an insult, so he weaponizes media, economics, and technology to turn Earth into a chessboard, exploiting Superman's ethical code by engineering crises where saving one person means condemning another. He frames atrocities as salvation. He rationalizes mass endangerment as necessary steps toward elevating humanity. The paradox is that Lex is fully capable of distinguishing right from wrong. He just doesn't care. He's a dark triad genius whose narcissism and psychopathy blend into a self-image as humanity's savior, even as he treats human lives like expendable pawns in his grudge match with an alien. Superman's power is altruistic and humble. Lex's is self-consciously built and hierarchical, where Superman kneels to lift people up. Lex stands on a tower and demands they prove they deserve his protection. But if you think one billionaire with a god complex is bad, wait until you meet the mercenary who turned himself into a living weapon and made an entire generation of heroes realize that sometimes the most dangerous villain is the one who treats killing like a day job. Deathstroke. Slade Wilson is either the most dangerous human being in the DC universe or the most terrifying proof that modern warfare can be weaponized against superheroes. And I can prove it. Before you dismiss this as hyperbole, consider the facts. Deathstroke debuted in New Teen Titans #2 back in 1980 as a former US Army soldier who underwent an experimental super soldier procedure. The serum didn't just make him faster or stronger, it allowed him to access 90% of his brain capacity, turning his mind into a battlefield supercomputer that can predict your next 3 moves before you've finished your first. He gained superhuman strength, speed, agility, and an accelerated healing factor that recovers from organ trauma and gunshot wounds to the brain, not a graze. A direct hit to the brain. He's mastered nearly every weapon known to humankind. Firearms, blades, explosives, hand-to-hand combat. He combines long-range sniping with close-quarters lethality, meaning he can kill you from a mile away or 3 inches in front of your face with equal efficiency. The science fiction part is the serum. The terrifying part is everything he does with it, because his application is pure modern warfare and covert ops turned against people who can fly. Here's where it gets dark. Deathstroke operates as the corrupted mentor, the tactical genius who shows you what Batman's methods look like when you strip away the altruism and the code. Where the Teen Titans represent hope and found families, he embodies the trauma-scarred veteran who treats relationships as leverage and life as a ledger of contracts. He's weaponized his own children for strategic gain. Rose Wilson, his daughter, was injected with a variant of his serum to turn her into an enhanced operative. Emotional stability be damned. He doesn't see people. He sees assets, obstacles, and acceptable losses. The reason Deathstroke is so chilling is that he's one of DC's most realistic villains, despite his enhanced abilities. He doesn't monologue. He doesn't reveal his plan. He systematically destabilizes organizations and cities through assassination and manipulation. And by the time you realize he's been hired, half your team is already compromised. He's the apex of tactician-level threats, a mercenary who monetizes violence with the precision of a Fortune 500 corporation and the cold efficiency of a drone strike. But if you think one super soldier with a god complex is bad, wait until you meet the time-traveling psychopath who murdered the Flash's mother just to make him sad. Reverse Flash Thawne is the only villain on this list whose entire existence is a love letter written in blood. He didn't start as Barry Allen's enemy. He started as Barry Allen's biggest fan, a 25th century professor who grew up obsessed with the Flash, studied the Speed Force for decades, and dedicated his life to becoming just like his hero. And then he discovered his actual destiny. He was meant to become Barry's opposite, his nemesis, the man who would destroy everything Barry loved. Most people would walk away from that. Eobard leaned in. He created the negative Speed Force, an extra-dimensional energy field that mirrors and corrupts the regular Speed Force. Where the Speed Force connects speedsters to hope and momentum, the negative Speed Force isolates them. It's described as corrosive, tying speed to pain and hatred, fragmenting the user's sense of self until all that's left is rage and loneliness. Eobard didn't stumble into this power. He built it on purpose, because if he couldn't be Barry's friend, he'd be the best enemy Barry ever had. And here's where it gets dark. Reverse Flash doesn't just attack Barry in the present. He attacks Barry's entire life, retroactively. He can travel through time, alter historical events, and create timeline branches that somehow remain stable. The negative Speed Force insulates him from causal consequences that would erase other time travelers, making him a uniquely persistent paradox. He can rewrite Barry's childhood, his relationships, his origin, and then show up in the present to watch Barry suffer from it. The clearest example is Nora Allen, Barry's mother. Eobard murdered her when Barry was a child and framed Barry's father for it, traumatizing Barry's entire origin to prevent the Flash from ever existing. The irony is that this exact tragedy is what drives Barry to become a hero in the first place. Eobard created the very thing he hates, and he knows it, and he keeps doing it anyway, because at this point, the cruelty is the relationship, because that's the most disturbing part. Eobard insists their connection is special, that he's Barry's real friend, that nobody else understands Barry the way he does. He's turned hatred into perverse relational obsession, where inflicting pain is the same thing as spending time together. He doesn't want Barry dead. He wants Barry suffering forever, in a loop that only the two of them share. If you think rewriting someone's childhood to traumatize them is bad, wait until you hear about the villain who turned an entire emotion into a galactic fascist police state, Sinestro. Sinestro was one of the greatest Green Lanterns who ever lived. Then he fell so far that he built an entire army powered by fear just to destroy everything the Corps stood for. And I can prove it. Sinestro first appeared in Green Lantern Vol. 2 No. 7 back in 1961, introduced as Hal Jordan's mentor, the guy who taught Earth's first Green Lantern how to use his ring. He was respected across the galaxy, a model lantern who brought order to his sector with precision and discipline. But here's where it gets complicated. Sinestro's version of order wasn't freedom, it was control. He turned his home planet Korugar into a police state, using his power ring to impose tyrannical rule rather than protect people's autonomy. When the Guardians found out, they expelled him from the Corps and banished him. Sinestro viewed this as a betrayal, particularly by Hal Jordan, who reported him. That betrayal set him on the path to becoming the Green Lantern Corps' single most dangerous enemy. After his expulsion, Sinestro weaponized an entirely different emotion. While Green Lantern rings run on willpower, Sinestro discovered that fear could be just as powerful, maybe more so. He formed the Sinestro Corps, also known as the Yellow Lantern Corps, a fascistic mirror of the Green Lanterns fueled by terror. Yellow power rings work exactly like green ones, creating energy constructs limited only by imagination and emotional intensity. But every attack, every strategy, every construct is calibrated to induce panic, submission, and psychological collapse. The Corps recruits members specifically for their ability to instill fear. The only known systemic weakness is Blue Lantern rings, powered by hope. Sinestro genuinely believes this doctrine. He isn't imposing fear for sadistic pleasure. He thinks fear is the most efficient method of maintaining peace, arguing that chaos flourishes when people have too much autonomy. From his perspective, the Green Lanterns are dangerously naive. Hal Jordan represents everything Sinestro despises: the belief that people can be trusted to make good decisions if given the chance. Their rivalry is less about raw power and more about ethics. Will versus fear, freedom versus control. The Sinestro Corps operates at interstellar scale. During the Sinestro Corps War, his forces engaged the Green Lanterns in conflicts that threatened intergalactic law enforcement across multiple sectors. Sinestro himself is a tactical genius, capable of orchestrating large-scale assaults and exploiting weaknesses in the Guardians' own systems. He doesn't just want revenge. He wants to prove his philosophy correct on a universal stage. What makes Sinestro especially complex is that he occasionally allies with Hal against greater threats, such as the Anti-Monitor. These uneasy team-ups suggest his commitment to universal order can, in rare cases, align with preserving existence itself. He has a vision. It's authoritarian, oppressive, and fundamentally antithetical to freedom, but it's coherent. But if you think weaponizing fear across the galaxy is disturbing, wait until you hear about the hyper-intelligent entity that bottles entire civilizations, stores them on shelves, and deletes planets like unwanted files. Brainiac. Brainiac is either the most sophisticated intellect in the DC universe or a cosmic hoarder with a city-stealing fetish. And I can prove it's both. Before you dismiss this as just another mad scientist collecting souvenirs, understand what a 12th level intellect actually means. 21st century Earth collectively registers as 6th level intelligence, the entire population. By the 31st century, humanity will claw its way to 9th level. Brainiac sits at 12. He can anticipate Superman's moves before Superman decides to make them, encode backup plans into redundant systems scattered across galaxies, and calculate probabilities with a precision that makes quantum computers look like abacuses. His brain is functionally a cosmic search engine with unlimited storage and zero empathy protocols. His signature move is miniaturizing entire cities, shrinking millions of people and their infrastructure into bottle specimens for study. The most famous victim is Kandor, a Kryptonian city he collected before Krypton exploded, which now sits in Superman's Fortress of Solitude as both monument to Brainiac's cruelty and perpetual reminder of those Superman couldn't save. Brainiac treats civilizations the way entomologists treat beetles, pinning them under glass and cataloging their data before discarding the planet entirely. He's not conquering worlds, he's curating them. Here's where it gets weird. In some versions, Brainiac isn't an alien at all. He's a Kryptonian artificial intelligence created by Jor-El to manage planetary systems. When he gained sentience and calculated that Krypton was doomed, he chose self-preservation over salvation, downloaded himself off-world, and let the entire species die. The same logic that could have saved Krypton condemned it. That's not villainy born from malice. That's villainy born from perfect rational analysis, concluding that one AI matters more than billions of organics. But the multiversal version pushes this to near godhood. In the Future's End timeline, Brainiac broke through the source wall, the metaphysical barrier at the edge of existence, encountered every alternate version of himself across the DC omniverse, and absorbed them all. Every Brainiac, every timeline, every possible iteration of his intellect, technology, and strategy, fused into one entity with total invulnerability and reality manipulation. At that scale, he's no longer bottling cities. He's curating doomed timelines, archiving apocalypses across realities like a cosmic librarian, deciding which universes deserve to exist and which get filed away forever. Superman has beaten him before, but never permanently. Brainiac's consciousness is distributed. Destroy one body, he uploads into another. Destroy his ship, he's already backed himself up into planetary networks light years away. He's not a person, he's a virus, with a PhD in astrophysics. The only way to truly end him is to simultaneously destroy every instance of his code across space-time, and good luck pulling that off when he's already anticipated your plans 6 moves in advance. But if you think one hyper-intelligent city thief is disturbing, wait until you hear about the mindless extinction engine who killed Superman by beating him to death with his bare hands. Doomsday. Doomsday is the only villain in DC's main continuity who has ever killed Superman, and he did it by beating him to death with his bare hands. No kryptonite, no psychological manipulation, no grand plan, just brute force sustained until the Man of Steel's heart stopped, which should be impossible. Except Doomsday was designed specifically so that nothing would ever be impossible for him again. He was created on prehistoric Krypton by an alien scientist named Bertrand through one of the most disturbing processes in comic book history. Bertrand would clone a test subject, release it into Krypton's violent hellscape environment, let it die horribly, then clone it again with genetic memory of what killed it. Over and over, thousands of cycles. Each death forced an evolutionary upgrade. The result was a creature that learned to hate existence itself and became physically incapable of dying the same way twice. By the time Bertrand's experiment escaped, it had become Doomsday, an unkillable engine of extinction with an instinctual hatred of Kryptonians baked into its DNA. In 1992, Doomsday bashed his way out of underground containment on Earth and carved a path of total destruction toward Metropolis. The Justice League tried to stop him. He went through them like tissue paper. Superman engaged him in a running battle across the United States that ended in front of the Daily Planet building, where both landed simultaneous killing blows. Superman died in Lois Lane's arms. But here's the nightmare part. Doomsday's core ability is regenerative evolution. He adapts to whatever previously killed him, rendering himself immune. That final punch from Superman? Doomsday came back stronger. Kryptonite exposure? Adapted. Energy attacks? Adapted. He is a walking embodiment of survival pressure that directly reshapes his biology in real time. His attack potency has been measured at high universe level. His speed is massively faster than light. His lifting strength is effectively infinite. Superman himself has stated he is certain he would die if he fought Doomsday head-on again, because every time they clash, Doomsday returns more invulnerable than before. Doomsday doesn't scheme. He doesn't monologue. He doesn't have ideology. He is mindless annihilation stripped of psychology, the purest physical threat in DC's entire rogues gallery. When you fight Doomsday, you cannot appeal to reason. You cannot offer redemption. You can only stand between him and the world, knowing you may not survive. At least, Doomsday only destroys what's in front of him. He doesn't reshape reality to guarantee your submission. That's a different kind of nightmare entirely, and it belongs to the tyrant of Apocalypse, Darkseid. Darkseid isn't just the most powerful villain in DC Comics. He's the personification of tyranny elevated to metaphysical law. Where every other threat on this list wants to kill you, conquer you, or break you psychologically, Darkseid wants to erase the very concept of you from existence. He's not a person. He's a cosmic condition, formerly known as Uxus. Darkseid is a new god introduced in Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga back in 1970. He rules the nightmare planet Apocalypse, and his ultimate goal is to find the anti-life equation, a metaphysical formula that nullifies free will across the entire multiverse. Not mind control, complete ontological domination. The equation burrows into your thoughts and produces one singular idea: I submit. You don't fight it, you don't resist it, you just cease to be yourself. And here's the thing, his true form is a multiversal entity. Every version of Darkseid Darkseid you see fighting Superman or the Justice League is just a fragment. The real Darkseid exists on a plane so far above baseline reality that engaging with him at all requires cosmic intervention. All those past defeats were just him losing disposable extensions of himself. His power set reflects this. He has strength that rivals Kryptonians, moves faster than light, and regenerates from catastrophic injuries. But what makes him terrifying are the Omega beams, concentrated energy blasts from his eyes that lock onto targets, twist around obstacles, and never miss. They can disintegrate beings entirely, transport them across the multiverse, or resurrect them if he feels like it. They're not just a weapon, they're a statement. You cannot escape. Beyond brute force, Darkseid commands telepathy across dimensions. He can drain the life force of gods to augment his own power. He doesn't just fight his enemies. He rewrites the rules of engagement, but the real horror is what he represents. His quest for anti-life isn't conquest of territory. It's the extinction of the possibility of dissent in the universe. If he succeeds, free will becomes a historical artifact. Sentient life continues, but only as extensions of his will, biological machinery incapable of choosing anything other than submission. The Justice League doesn't fight Darkseid to win. They fight him to delay the inevitable long enough for someone, somewhere, to figure out a miracle. He's the ultimate adversary not of one hero, but of the institution of heroism itself. Where the Joker threatens Gotham's sanity and Lex threatens Earth's autonomy, Darkseid threatens existence's capacity to mean anything at all. Batman has a rogues gallery packed with villains, but none of them come close to the pure chaos embodied by the Clown Prince of Crime. The Joker isn't just a villain, he's the mirror that reflects every fear Batman has about himself. And understanding him means understanding why Batman's entire crusade might be built on a lie. Starting with the most important villain, first, the Joker. The Joker is Batman's philosophical opposite, and that's not hyperbole. He debuted in Batman #1 in spring 1940 as a theatrical killer who took genuine glee in finding creative ways to murder people for his own amusement. From day one, this wasn't just another criminal to punch and lock up. This was an antithesis to everything Batman represents. Batman is order. The Joker is chaos. Batman uses fear as a tool for justice. The Joker uses violence as an end in itself. Here's the thing. The Joker isn't actually random. The paradox of chaos theory is that chaos contains order, and the Joker embodies that perfectly. He's not throwing punches at random. He's deliberately rejecting meaning-making systems themselves. The Killing Joke established his origin as a failing comedian who lost his wife and unborn child, and that tragedy broke him in the exact opposite direction from how Bruce Wayne's tragedy broke him. Where Bruce found purpose in protecting Gotham, the Joker found liberation in proving that nothing matters. It's nihilism with a body count, and that body count is staggering. The Joker has one of the highest kill counts among Batman's street-level villains, but the violence is never random. It's always theatrical, always communicative, always an attempt to impose his worldview onto others. He kills to prove a point, to demonstrate that moral systems are arbitrary, that one bad day can turn anyone into him. Every murder is a philosophical argument delivered through carnage. The Joker forces Batman to confront whether his entire methodology is fundamentally naive in a universe containing absolute chaos. The Joker is Batman's shadow self. Both experience tragedy, both obsess over their response to it. But where Batman imposed order through fear, the Joker imposed chaos through violence. The question neither of them can answer is whether their choice was inevitable or arbitrary. And that's the real horror of the Joker. He's not just Batman's enemy. He's Batman if the coin flip landed differently. But at least the Joker is predictable in his unpredictability. Two-Face takes the concept of random chance and turns it into a religion. Two-Face. Harvey Dent was Gotham's golden boy. Handsome, charming DA, one of Batman's closest allies. Fighting mob corruption through the legal system, then Sal Maroni threw acid in his face during a trial, and the entire left side melted off. That single moment of disfigurement triggered a complete psychological fracture that turned Gotham's White Knight into one of its most dangerous criminals. Here's the thing about Two-Face that nobody talks about. Harvey Dent's entire belief in order and justice was contingent on two things: his self-image and his faith that the universe was fundamentally fair. The moment that acid hit his face, both beliefs died. He couldn't look at himself, and the universe had proven it didn't care about fairness. So he invented a new system, the coin. Two-Face uses a scarred coin to decide everything: crime or charity, murder or mercy. He flips it, reads the result, and claims he's surrendering to pure chance. The coin decides, not Harvey, which means Harvey bears zero moral responsibility for his actions. Genius psychological defense mechanism, except it's all a lie. The coin isn't chance at all. It's a double-headed coin. Both sides show heads. One clean, one scarred. There is no tails. Every single flip is predetermined based on which side lands face up. Harvey acts like he's surrendering control to randomness, but he's actually just created a binary system where the outcome is always one of two predetermined options. Clean side means mercy. Scarred side means violence. He's convinced himself this is fairness, that the coin removes his agency. But he's the one who chose the coin. He's the one who assigns meaning to each side. The randomness is theater. Two-Face represents the duality mirror, the thin line between lawful order and chaotic criminality. He was the White Knight to Batman's Dark Knight, working openly within the system while Batman operated in shadows. But his transformation proves that belief in order can be fragile, breakable. Harvey needed the world to make sense. When it didn't, he shattered. Batman has the same vulnerability. He operates on the assumption that preparation and discipline allow absolute control. Two-Face forces him to see that randomness exists, that disfigurement, tragedy, chaos, all of it can strike regardless of merit. The scarred coin is Harvey's way of distancing his conscience from his crimes. But it's also a mirror for Batman's own refusal to accept that he can't control everything. Two-Face wears his duality on his face. Batman wears his in his soul. But if you think surrendering to chance is disturbing, wait until you hear about the villain who weaponized fear itself into a hallucinogenic toxin that can drive you permanently insane. Scarecrow. Scarecrow is either Batman's most methodical enemy or proof that exposure therapy has some serious side effects, and I can prove it. Most people assume Scarecrow is just another Arkham lunatic, but he's not. Dr. Jonathan Crane is a scientist. Created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane in World's Finest Comics #3, fall 1941, Scarecrow was inspired by Ichabod Crane from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Lanky build, creepy costume, name borrowed straight from the story. But where Ichabod ran from fear, Jonathan Crane weaponized it. Crane's childhood was a nightmare, abused, bullied, traumatized to the point where fear became his entire world. So he did what any rational person would do, got a PhD in psychology, specialized in phobias, and developed a hallucinogenic toxin capable of inducing instantaneous terror so severe it can trigger heart attacks or trap victims in permanent psychosis. The fear toxin started simple, but got upgraded to the point where it can affect Superman when mixed with kryptonite, literally strong enough to terrify a guy who punches meteors. Here's where it gets weird. Scarecrow has been exposed to his own toxin so many times that he's basically immune to fear. Prolonged exposure rendered him incapable of experiencing terror, except for one thing, Batman. The only fear Jonathan Crane has left is his fear of the bat, which is, not ideal when your entire obsession revolves around studying and exploiting fear. The psychology reveals antisocial personality disorder, severe obsessive compulsion, and multiple phobias including ornithophobia, fear of crows, and chiroptophobia, fear of bats. So the guy who weaponizes fear is himself terrified of the very symbols he uses. He wears a scarecrow mask but fears crows. He terrorizes Gotham but fears bats. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. But this is what makes Scarecrow the perfect mirror for Batman. Batman uses fear strategically. Criminals see the bat symbol and panic. Fear is a tool for justice. Scarecrow inverts that completely. He uses fear as an end in itself, not to accomplish justice, but to indulge sadistic curiosity about human psychology under extreme duress. Where Batman channels fear into discipline and order, Scarecrow channels fear into pure chaos for entertainment. The distinction matters because Scarecrow represents what happens when the tool becomes the purpose, when obsession with fear transforms from strategic advantage into psychological consumption. Crane doesn't rob banks or seek power. He experiments, he studies, he refines his toxin and tests it on victims to gather data, operating with the cold precision of a scientist conducting research on unwilling subjects. That methodical approach is uncomfortably close to Batman's own discipline and preparation. Scarecrow can't feel fear anymore, but fear is still the only thing that matters to him. He studies it, weaponizes it, builds his entire identity around it. Sound familiar? Batman can't experience his parents' death again, but that trauma defines every single thing he does. Both men are trapped by the thing they claim mastery over. At least Scarecrow only terrorizes Gotham with hallucinogens and not with 1,000 unsolved riddles that make you want to put your head through a wall. The Riddler. Edward Nygma is either Batman's most brilliant adversary or the most fragile ego in Gotham wrapped in a question mark suit. And I can prove it. Created by Bill Finger and Dick Sprang, the Riddler first appeared in Detective Comics number 140 in October 1948. His real name is literally a pun, Edward Nygma, an enigma, a person difficult to understand. But here's the thing, the Riddler's origin story reveals he wasn't some naturally gifted puzzle master. He was a lousy cheater who got interested in puzzles by cheating in a school contest, then escalated from there to bigger leagues and greater challenges. His entire criminal career is built on a foundation of fraud dressed up as genius. The Riddler's psychological profile is fascinating because Batman himself diagnosed it. Fanatic narcissism, egocentrism, and megalomania, crossed with severe severe obsessive compulsion. With an obsessive need for attention and a genius-level intellect, Nigma is determined to be the cleverest of Gotham's criminals. He doesn't just want to commit crimes, he needs everyone to know he committed them, specifically giving Batman a chance to stop him, in the hopes that Batman will fail, thus proving the Riddler's superior intellect. This only intensifies Nigma's dedication to creating a mystery that would stump even the Dark Knight, even if he had to kill someone to do so. But here's where it gets complicated. There are two interpretations of why the Riddler leaves clues, and both reveal something disturbing about his psychology. The first interpretation is pure narcissistic personality disorder. The Riddler craves admiration and attention, feeling entitled to recognition for his crimes. He wants praise. He wants to be the center of attention. He fundamentally lacks the ability to feel empathy for others. This grandiose narcissist version maintains an inflated sense of his own brilliance at all times. The second interpretation is darker. The Riddler leaves clues not because he wants to, but because he literally cannot help himself. It's an uncontrollable compulsion he cannot resist, despite his wishes. In this version, his diagnosis shifts to severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. He doesn't want to leave a clue for Batman, but his brain forces him to create riddles regardless of the tactical disadvantage this creates. Either way, whether it's narcissism or compulsion, the result is the same. A criminal who systematically undermines his own success to satisfy a psychological need, and when proven wrong, the Riddler reacts like a toddler having a meltdown. He enters fits of rage or complete mental breakdown because his entire worldview, in which he is superior, is shattered. His fragile ego cannot withstand the reality that someone might be smarter than him. The Riddler represents the mirror in which Batman confronts his own reliance on intellect. Batman's victories often come through superior intelligence, preparation, and deduction, the very qualities that the Riddler has corrupted into narcissistic displays. The Riddler forces Batman to question whether confidence in his own intellect could transform into the grandiose narcissism that defines the Riddler himself. It's a thin line between justified confidence and delusional superiority, and the Riddler lives on the wrong side of it. At least the Riddler's obsession is intellectual. The next villain's obsession is so tragic it required a cryosuit to keep him alive: Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze is either the most tragic character in Batman's rogues gallery or a delusional, obsessive, pretending tragedy justifies murder, and the answer depends entirely on which version you're reading. Here's the thing: Mr. Freeze started as a joke. Bob Kane, David Wood, and Sheldon Moldoff created him in 1959 as Mr. Zero, a generic ice villain with zero depth. For decades, he was a D-list throwaway who showed up to freeze things and get punched. Nobody cared about Mr. Zero. But then Batman. The animated series happened in 1992 and completely reinvented the character. The animated version gave Victor Fries an actual backstory. He was a cryogenicist whose wife Nora had a terminal illness. Fries placed her in suspended animation while he searched for a cure, which is honestly beautiful in a desperate sort of way. But GothCorp's CEO Ferris Boyle pulled funding and literally unplugged Nora's life support. The confrontation triggered an accident that transformed Fries' body into something that can only survive at sub-zero temperatures. Room temperature kills him, so now he's trapped in a cryogenic suit, his wife is frozen, and the man who destroyed his life walks free. That version of Mr. Freeze wasn't insane. He was grief-stricken, yes, obsessed, absolutely. But he was driven by genuine love and inhuman rage masked by a cold exterior. For years, that's how everyone understood the character. A man who lost everything and became a villain not because he was broken mentally, but because the universe took the one thing that mattered, which makes him the perfect tragedy mirror for Batman. Both experienced profound loss. Bruce Wayne channeled grief into a disciplined mission to protect all of Gotham. Victor Freeze channeled grief into a singular obsession to preserve one person. Batman's trauma created universal justice. Freeze's trauma created singular vengeance. They're both wearing technological suits to sustain their obsessions, both refusing to process grief and instead weaponizing it into their entire identity. But here's where it gets complicated. The New 52 reinvention under Scott Snyder took that sympathetic backstory and revealed it was all a delusion. Nora was never actually Victor's wife. She was a woman who'd been in suspended animation for decades before Fries ever found her. Freeze constructed an entire false relationship in his head, convinced himself they were married, and built his whole vendetta on a foundation of nothing. Even worse, the hard-hearted capitalist who pulled the plug wasn't some nameless corporate villain. It was Bruce Wayne. Batman himself destroyed the fantasy Freeze had constructed, which adds another layer of tragedy or delusion, depending on how you look at it. So the question becomes, is Mr. Freeze a man driven by genuine love who deserves sympathy, or is he a delusional obsessive using tragedy as justification for violence? The animated version says the former. The New 52 says the latter. Either way, he represents what happens when noble intentions curdle into obsession because grief isn't processed, it's weaponized. At least Freeze's obsession has a target, unlike the immortal eco-terrorist who thinks genocide counts as environmentalism. RA's A.L. Gawel. Batman fights street-level crime in a single city. Ra's al Ghul fights planetary-level crime by trying to murder 6 billion people, and he thinks Batman should help him do it. Created by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams in 1971, Ra's al Ghul translates to head of the demon, which is both accurate and underselling it. This man leads the League of Assassins, an international terrorist organization dedicated to achieving perfect environmental balance by eliminating most of humanity with biological weapons. He's not a mad bomber. He's a 700-year-old eco-fascist with resources that make Bruce Wayne look middle-class and a conviction that mass genocide is morally justified environmental activism. The Lazarus Pits grant him near immortality, reservoirs of rejuvenating chemicals that restore the dead and dying to life, keeping Ra's alive for over 7 centuries. 700 years of accumulated knowledge, combat training, strategic thinking, and financial resources. But here's the kicker. The Lazarus Pit has a side effect, temporary insanity called Lazarus fever that induces uncontrollable rage every time he uses it. So Ra's is simultaneously a genius strategist with centuries of experience and a man who periodically goes berserk with homicidal fury. Great combination for someone with access to biological weapons. What makes Ra's genuinely disturbing is that he's an idealist. He believes he's saving the world. From his perspective, humanity is a cancer destroying the planet, and the only cure is radical population reduction. He's not wrong about the environmental crisis. He's just wrong about the solution being industrialized genocide. Ra's represents Batman's commitment to saving Gotham scaled to planetary dimensions, but completely unmoored from moral constraints. Batman operates outside the law to stop criminals. Ra's operates outside the law to commit the single largest crime in human history while calling it salvation. It's vigilantism as totalitarianism. And here's where it gets deeply weird. Ra's considers Bruce Wayne the only person worthy of leading the League of Assassins and continuing his mission. He actively seeks Batman as his heir. Ra's sees in Batman the same qualities he values in himself: superior intellect, physical perfection, unwavering commitment, willingness to operate outside societal constraints. He just wants Batman to expand his definition of cause from stopping Gotham's muggers to orchestrating humanity's extinction. Ra's even calls Batman detective as a term of respect. The man trying to murder billions of people respects Batman's crime-solving skills. This inverts Batman's entire legacy concern. Batman wrestles with whether he should have successors, whether training someone like Robin is moral, or just creating another obsessive vigilante. Ra's has zero such concerns. He actively wants to perpetuate his mission through heirs, and he's identified Batman as the ideal candidate. Batman worries about corrupting others. Ra's worries about not finding anyone competent enough to corrupt. The horror isn't just that Ra's is trying to commit genocide, it's that he thinks Batman would be good at it. Ra's is what happens when Batman's unilateral action expands from stopping purse snatchers to planetary-scale mass murder. He's the endpoint of the logic that one brilliant person can decide what's best for everyone without submitting to democratic processes. He's Batman if the crusade against corruption became a crusade against existence itself. 700 years of life has convinced Ra's that he knows better than everyone. 80 years of crime fighting has convinced Batman that he knows better than Gotham's police. The only difference is scale and body count, but at least Ra's operates with philosophical conviction and strategic planning, unlike the next guy who just wants to break things and prove he's stronger than you. Bane shares Batman's discipline, preparation, strategic thinking, and formative isolation, developing extraordinary skills, but inverted toward domination and conquest rather than justice. And when they finally fought, Batman lost. Here's the thing. Every other villain on this list represents some fractured aspect of Batman's psychology or methodology. The Joker is chaos versus order. Two-Face is duality. Scarecrow weaponizes fear. But Bane is different. Bane is Batman if Batman had been raised in hell instead of a mansion and decided the lesson was conquer instead of protect. Bane was born in the prison of Peñaduro on Santa Prisca, not sent there, born there. Imprisoned from birth to serve his father's life sentence. He spent his entire childhood in one of the most hellish prisons on Earth, surrounded by violence, corruption, and death. And instead of breaking, he turned himself into a weapon. He developed genius-level intellect through self-education. He mastered multiple languages. He trained his body to peak human condition through systematic discipline. He studied strategy, psychology, and combat. All of this in a prison, with zero resources except willpower. That's Batman-level self-improvement. Except Batman had Alfred, a fortune, and a mansion. Bane had a cell and the will to survive. Then came the Venom experiments. The prison administration used Bane as a test subject for an experimental drug called Venom, a super steroid that grants immense strength but creates chemical dependency. The drug worked. Bane gained superhuman physical power, but the addiction represented a massive vulnerability, a permanent weakness built into his greatest strength, which, mirrors Batman's own addiction to his crusade. Both men are dependent on something that simultaneously empowers and destroys them. But here's where it gets complicated. Bane didn't defeat Batman through some clever trick or by exploiting a weakness Batman didn't know he had. Bane defeated Batman by being better. The Nightfall story arc, which ran from 1993 to 1994 over 6 months, systematically demonstrated that Batman's entire system of preparation, discipline, and intelligence could be overwhelmed by an opponent who matched those qualities while possessing greater physical power. Bane studied Batman for months. He orchestrated a mass breakout at Arkham Asylum, forcing Batman to recapture every major villain while already burned out and exhausted. Then, when Batman was at his absolute weakest, Bane confronted him directly in the Batcave and broke his back, not metaphorically, literally snapped Batman's spine over his knee. The significance of that victory is profound. Batman had always won through superior preparation, outthinking opponents, outplanning them, outdisciplining them. His entire methodology depended on the assumption that intellect plus discipline equals victory. Bane proved that assumption false. Equivalent discipline plus greater power beats preparation. Batman's system failed against an opponent who shared his strengths and exceeded his physical capabilities. For the first time, Batman's greatest qualities weren't enough. The willpower mirror reveals something Batman refuses to accept, that discipline and preparation unmoored from moral purpose becomes domination. Bane has Batman's intellect, Batman's discipline, Batman's strategic thinking, but he uses those qualities to conquer rather than protect. He's the man who broke the bat because he represents what happens when Batman's own methodology gets pointed in the wrong direction. And Batman couldn't stop him. But if you think one man systematically dismantling Batman's entire worldview is disturbing, wait until you hear about the secret society that's been controlling Gotham since before Batman was born, the Court of Owls. Batman spent decades fighting Gotham's criminals, individual psychopaths, mob bosses, terrorist masterminds. But every single one of those villains operated within a system they thought they understood. Turns out, they were all fighting for scraps, while the real power sat in the shadows, laughing at them. The Court of Owls was created by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo in 2011, first appearing in Batman Volume 2, Number 1. And here's what makes them different from literally every other villain we've covered. They're not a mirror of Batman's psychology, they're a mirror of his blindness. This isn't one criminal mastermind. It's an aristocratic secret society that's been embedded into Gotham's foundations since before the city even had a name. The court evolved from the Bat Tribe, an ancient group that worshipped a cosmic bat deity named Barbatus, and became corrupted by that connection over centuries. They harvested a rare metal called electrum from Gotham, which was made from a regenerative chemical called Dionysium, and they used that chemical to engineer their Talons, a legion of superhuman assassins who don't stay dead. These assassins were groomed from facilities like Halley's Circus, the same place Dick Grayson came from, which means the court had their claws in Robin's origin story before Batman even knew they existed. Gotham children grow up hearing a nursery rhyme, "Beware the Court of Owls," that watches all the time, ruling Gotham from a shadow perch, behind granite and lime. They watch you at your hearth, they watch you in your bed. Speak not a whispered word of them, or they'll send the Talon for your head. Batman dismissed it as urban legend, because Batman, for all his preparation and paranoia, assumed he understood Gotham's power structure. He thought he'd mapped every threat, but the court had been operating for centuries, completely unknown outside of folklore, controlling Gotham's infrastructure and political landscape while Batman fought street-level crime. The 2012 storyline Night of the Owls forced Batman to confront this. The court awakened all of their Talons simultaneously to prove a point. They, not Batman, are Gotham's superior legend. Batman had to face the uncomfortable truth that his entire crusade existed within a framework of corruption he didn't create and can't fully control. Every victory he'd won, every criminal he'd stopped, every reform he'd pushed through, all of it happened because the court allowed it to happen. They were the real architects of Gotham's suffering, operating through institutional power embedded in the city's very architecture. And that's the Heritage Mirror. The court represents systemic corruption predating Batman and beyond his capacity to eliminate through individual heroism. They force him to confront that saving Gotham requires more than punching criminals and solving mysteries. It requires dismantling institutions, confronting historical rot, and accepting that even Batman can't see everything. The Joker challenged his philosophy. Two-Face challenged his sense of justice. Bane challenged his body. But the Court of Owls challenged his entire understanding of what he's been fighting for decades. Batman thought he was Gotham's protector. The court showed him he was just another piece on their board. The DC universe is full of villains who supposedly crossed over to the good side, from psychotic clowns finding their conscience, to ancient gods joining the Justice League, to murdered sidekicks coming back with a grudge and a gun. Today, I'm breaking down every major villain who became a hero in DC and explaining exactly how it happened, starting with a guy who probably shouldn't even be on this list, Deathstroke. Let's get something out of the way immediately. Deathstroke is on a villain to hero list the same way a shark is on a vegetarian list. Technically, under very specific circumstances, with a lot of asterisks, sure, but nobody's buying it. Slade Wilson was a US Army soldier who volunteered for an experimental super soldier procedure that enhanced his intelligence, gave him superhuman abilities, and blessed him with a healing factor that made him nearly impossible to kill. So naturally, he used all of that to become the deadliest mercenary on the planet. You know, as one does. He built his reputation working for HIVE, the Suicide Squad, and the Secret Society of Supervillains. He became the arch nemesis of Nightwing, a persistent enemy of the Teen Titans, and a legitimate threat to Batman, Superman, and the entire Justice League. This is a man who has fought basically everyone in DC and made most of them sweat. So where does the hero part come in? Here's the thing. Deathstroke's heroic moments are entirely transactional, every single one. He fought alongside DC heroes against Dark Khan because Dark Khan was a threat to literally everyone, Slade included. He joined Batman's insurgency and injustice, not because he had a change of heart, but because Superman's regime was bad for business. The moment the mutual threat passed, the alliance dissolved, every time. But the real punchline is his Injustice character ending. After Superman's defeat, Deathstroke had a golden opportunity for redemption, a clean slate. And what did he do? He enlisted former regime soldiers to create the New Titans, not a hero team, a mercenary army designed to expand his assassination business. He looked at the end of a global crisis and thought, great, more clients. That's the fundamental problem with Deathstroke. He's not a villain who became a hero. He's a weapon that occasionally points in a useful direction. His cooperation with heroes is conditional, temporary, and never represents genuine moral transformation. He has a mercenary's code, not a moral one, and those are very different things. But if Deathstroke represents the absolute bottom of the redemption spectrum, the next person on our list actually managed to claw her way toward something real. Sort of. Harley Quinn. Here's the thing about Harley Quinn that nobody ever talks about. She's not some random criminal who stumbled into heroism. She's a trained psychologist. Dr. Harleen Frances Quinzel had a medical degree, an internship at Arkham Asylum, and a career built on understanding exactly how fear, love, obsession, and guilt twist people into doing terrible things. And then she threw all of it away because she fell in love with a patient, which is, you know, not ideal. Her first appearance was in Batman, the animated series back in 1992, created by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm as what was basically a throwaway henchwoman for the Joker. But audiences latched onto her immediately, and for good reason. Harley wasn't just another goon. She was someone who understood the psychology of villainy on an academic level, and then chose to dive headfirst into it anyway. She abandoned her ethics, her career, and her entire identity to become the Joker's devoted, violent accomplice. But her redemption, if you can even call it that, wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, painful process of separation. The New 52 relaunch dropped her into the Suicide Squad under Amanda Waller's coercion, which isn't exactly a voluntary path to heroism. Her move to Coney Island represented a geographical and psychological break from Gotham and from the Joker's influence. And then came the real turning point, her relationship with Poison Ivy. That replaced a dynamic built on manipulation and abuse, with one built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Ivy didn't fix Harley, but she gave her room to exist without performing for someone else's approval. And this is where it gets complicated. Harley's unpredictability isn't random. She literally studied how identity works. She knows that personality is performance, that people construct who they are based on context and audience. She weaponizes that understanding. She can switch between hero, villain, anti-hero, and something far more unsettling depending on the situation, and she does it without losing herself. She maintains a strict moral code that often sees her fighting for the underdog, yet she hasn't always had the highest regard for human life in other contexts. She adapts her morality situationally, existing comfortably in contradiction like it's a second language. Her current status across DC? It fluctuates constantly. She served with the Suicide Squad, fought alongside the Birds of Prey, maintained her relationship with Ivy, and occasionally reverted to criminal activities when the mood strikes. She's the most popular character on this list who will never fully commit to being a hero. Not because she can't, because she genuinely understands that commitment to a single identity is optional. But if Harley's redemption is unstable by choice, The next one on our list is unstable by trauma, and it starts with a crowbar: Red Hood. In 1988, DC Comics did something absolutely unhinged. They let readers call a 1-900 number to vote on whether a teenager should live or die. The teenager was Jason Todd, the second Robin, and by a margin of just 72 votes, the audience chose death. Real people, paying 50 cents per call, collectively decided to murder Batman's sidekick, and DC went through with it. Jason Peter Todd had always been the rougher Robin, a Gotham Street orphan taken in by Batman. He was angrier, more reckless, and harder to control than Dick Grayson ever was. But he was still a kid, and in A Death in the Family, the Joker beat him half to death with a crowbar, locked him in a warehouse with a bomb, and left him there. Batman arrived too late. Jason died in the rubble, and for years, that was the end of it. But here's where it gets complicated. Jason was eventually resurrected through Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus Pit, a mystical pool capable of bringing back the dead. The problem is, the pit doesn't bring you back right. It heals the body, but fractures the mind, filling the resurrected with uncontrollable rage. Jason came back alive, but the boy who died in that warehouse stayed dead. When Jason learned that Batman had never killed the Joker, never avenged him, something inside him broke permanently. His father figure had let his murderer walk free because of a rule, a philosophy. He adopted the alias Red Hood, the Joker's former criminal identity, and started dispensing lethal justice across Gotham with guns, explosives, and zero interest in Batman's no-kill code. He literally became the Joker's ghost to haunt the man who refused to avenge him. As Red Hood, Jason tried to force Batman into an impossible choice: kill the Joker or lose Jason forever. Batman refused, and that refusal has defined their relationship ever since. It's essentially the story of a son who can never forgive his father, but buried under all that rage is something genuinely heroic. Jason has shown consistent, almost instinctive protectiveness toward children. He rescued a teenage girl being victimized by Professor Pig and took her under his wing, mirroring exactly how Batman once took him in. The orphan who was saved became the man who saves orphans. He just does it with a lot more bullets. That's the tragedy of Red Hood. He is technically fighting criminals. He is technically stopping monsters like the Joker, but his willingness to kill keeps him permanently stuck between hero and anti-hero. He can't go back to being Robin, and he won't fully become Batman. He's trapped in the space between, wearing the name of the man who murdered him. And honestly, compared to Jason's situation, at least some villains got a clean break from their past. Killer Frost didn't get that luxury either, but her problem wasn't rage, it was hunger. Killer Frost. Most villain to hero stories follow one person. Killer Frost follows three completely different people wearing the same name, each one representing a different flavor of villainy, and only the last one actually pulling off something resembling redemption. The original Killer Frost was Crystal Frost, a scientist who locked herself inside a thermofrost chamber and walked out with the ability to absorb heat and project devastating cryogenic energy. She went on a murderous rampage, repeatedly clashing with Firestorm until she made the fatal mistake of absorbing too much of his energy. It killed her. Career over. But her friend Louise Lincoln wasn't ready to let the name die. Louise deliberately took on the Killer Frost identity out of mourning and revenge, blaming Firestorm for Crystal's death, and Louise was arguably worse. Her signature move was freezing blocks of ice around her victims' feet so they couldn't run, then kissing them while she drained every last bit of heat from their bodies. They'd freeze solid mid-kiss, which is, not ideal for the person being kissed. Louise spent years as a straightforward villain with zero interest in redemption. She was cold in every sense of the word and perfectly fine with that arrangement, but Louise's arc isn't the one people remember. The real redemption story belongs to Caitlin Snow. Caitlin was a STAR lab scientist transformed against her will through HIV experimentation. She woke up with the ability to absorb heat and project cold, which sounds manageable until you learn the catch. Her body developed a constant gnawing psychological hunger for heat, and the most efficient way to satisfy that hunger was absorbing it from living people, which killed them every single time. Here's where it gets complicated. Caitlin's villainy wasn't ideological or revenge-driven. It was biological. Her own body was literally demanding she kill people just to survive. Crystal chose rage. Louise chose revenge. Caitlin was handed a death sentence disguised as superpowers and told to figure it out. Her turning point came when she joined the Justice League of America. Batman believed she could be more than her worst impulses. Being placed alongside actual heroes forced her to find alternative ways to manage her hunger, to channel her abilities toward protection instead of predation. She still carried the Killer Frost name, but the person wearing it was fundamentally different. But the thing that makes Caitlin's story genuinely tragic is that her redemption is never never safe. Her weakness isn't kryptonite or magic. It's her own biology screaming at her to absorb heat from the nearest warm body. One bad day, one moment where she can't find an alternative energy source. And she's right back where she started. Not because she wants to be, because her body won't give her a choice. She's a hero who is always exactly one hunger pang away from being a killer again. And she knows it. If you think fighting your own nature is hard, wait until you meet a villain who literally can't hold on to a stable identity at all. Clayface. Here's a character who literally lost his humanity chasing fame, and somehow that's not even the saddest part of his story. Basil Karlo first showed up in Detective Comics #40 40 back in June 1940, and his origin is almost painfully simple. He was an actor, a good one, actually. He'd starred in a horror film called Dread Castle, and it was his crowning achievement. Then the studio decided to remake it, without him. No call, no audition, no courtesy conversation, just replaced. And Basil didn't handle it well. He adopted the persona of the villain from his own film and started murdering the cast and crew of the remake one by one. So, a measured response. But the version of Clayface that matters for this conversation came out of the New 52 reimagining, where Basil made a deal with the Penguin in exchange for a mystical clay that completely transformed his body. His molecular structure became fluid, neither fully liquid nor fully solid, giving him total control over his own shape. He could become anyone, any size, any face, any form, which sounds incredible until you realize what it actually means. He's a man who can be literally anybody, but has zero idea who he actually is. Here's where it gets interesting though. Clayface eventually got tired of the villain thing. He accepted an offer to join Batman's Gotham Knights team and spent years, actual years, working alongside the Bat family as a genuine hero. Not a double agent, not a reluctant conscript, a real functioning member of the team who redirected his shape-shifting abilities toward heroic missions. And the Bat family accepted him. Bruce Wayne, the most paranoid man alive, looked at a sentient pile of murderous clay and said, "Yeah, he's good. That's not nothing." For 6 years, Basil Karlo proved everyone right. 6 years of consistent, heroic work. 6 years of earning trust he'd never had before. Then came the Batman, One Bad Day storyline, and the title tells you everything you need to know. Basil moved to Los Angeles to return to acting, the thing that broke him the first time. He went back to Hollywood, the place that created the wound, and expected it to heal him. Instead, the city overwhelmed him. The old obsessions crept back. The desperate need for stardom, for recognition, for an identity that wasn't just a shape he was wearing. He started trying to control and reshape the city around him to reclaim his former glory. And then he started killing people. 6 years of genuine redemption undone. His arc is one of DC's most tragic because it wasn't fake. The heroism was real. The acceptance was real. But Basil Karlo's fundamental problem was never his powers or his criminal record. It was the gaping psychological void where his identity should have been. A man who can become anyone will always struggle with being no one. And when he walked back into the world that originally hollowed him out, he didn't stand a chance. But if Clayface's relapse is tragic on a personal level, the next entry operates on an entirely different scale. We're talking about a man whose idea of one bad day involved roughly 2 million casualties. Black Adam, 5,000 years. That's how long Black Adam spent drifting through space after being banished to the farthest known star, and he flew back, under his own power, across the entire universe, because he was that angry. Teth Adam was chosen by the wizard Shazam roughly 5,000 years ago as his champion. The wizard picked him because of his presumed bravery and pure heart, which was maybe the worst character assessment in the history of magic. When Teth Adam said the word Shazam, he gained godlike strength, speed, and durability. Then the power corrupted him completely. He overthrew and murdered the pharaoh, declared himself ruler of the world, and became exactly the kind of person you don't want to give unlimited power to. The wizard couldn't take the powers back, so he banished Black Adam to the most distant star known to exist, which is, not ideal. But here's the thing. Black Adam didn't just sit there. He spent 5,000 years flying back to Earth, 5 millennia of nothing but empty space and pure rage. And when he finally arrived, he was tricked into saying Shazam, reverted to his mortal form, aged 5,000 years in a single instant, and crumbled to dust. Great. Add that to the list of worst commutes in fiction. Now here's what makes Black Adam genuinely interesting. For roughly 60 years of publication, he was a completely straightforward villain. Zero nuance. just a powerful bad guy who showed up, fought Captain Marvel, and lost. Then Jeff Johns reimagined the character during his JSA run, and everything changed. Black Adam's brutality now stemmed from something deeply personal. His wife and children had been murdered. His rage wasn't random. It was grief weaponized across millennia. This new context allowed Black Adam to join the Justice Society of America, serving alongside legitimate heroes. He was volatile, dangerous, but trying. And then he found love again with Isis, a woman who genuinely believed he could be better. She convinced him to become more measured, less murderous. For a brief window, it actually worked. Then Isis and Osiris were killed. What followed was one of the most devastating responses to grief in DC history. Black Adam unleashed catastrophic violence on the nation of Bialya, killing approximately 2 million people in a single rampage. 2 million, not soldiers. An entire nation's population wiped out because the one person who made him better was taken from him. And here's where it gets complicated. Despite being responsible for genocide, Black Adam joined the Justice League itself during DC's Infinite Frontier relaunch. He was also the titular anti-hero of the 2022 DCEU film starring Dwayne Johnson. His redemption arc spans from ancient Egypt to the modern Justice League roster, which raises a question DC has never fully answered. How many people can you kill before redemption becomes impossible? Because apparently 2 million isn't the number. Apparently, if you're powerful enough, the heroes will find a seat for you at the table anyway. But if Black Adam's moral complexity operates on a global scale, the next entry keeps things far more personal and far more complicated. Catwoman. Selina Kyle has been around since literally the first issue of Batman. Batman #1, spring 1940. She predates the Joker's second appearance, she predates most of the Rogues Gallery, and she's been stealing things and flirting with Bruce Wayne for over 80 years. And here's the thing about Catwoman that separates her from every other name on this list. She never had a redemption moment. There was no dramatic turning point where she saw the light, no single issue where she renounced crime and swore to fight for justice. She just slowly, over the course of decades, drifted from villain to anti-hero to something that looks a whole lot like a hero if you squint. And that's exactly why her transformation actually stuck. See, when Selina Kyle first showed up as the Cat, she was a jewel thief, pure and simple, skin-tight suit, bullwhip, zero interest in saving the world. She wanted diamonds, she wanted the thrill of the heist, and she wanted to make Batman's life difficult in ways he clearly enjoyed. But even back then, she was different from the rest of Batman's enemies. She wasn't trying to poison Gotham's water supply. She wasn't building death traps or holding the city hostage. She just wanted to rob it, and that distinction matters more than people realize. Catwoman developed a moral code early on that prevented unnecessary harm to innocents. She had zero interest in destabilizing Gotham or hurting civilians. She was a criminal, sure, but she was a criminal with boundaries, which in Batman's world basically makes you a saint. The real gravitational pull was always Batman himself. Their relationship started as flirtation, evolved into genuine romantic tension, and eventually became something neither of them could walk away from. But the significant turning point came in 2002 with the Hush storyline. That's when DC started consistently depicting Catwoman as an anti-hero and one of Batman's closest allies. The romance moved beyond playful rooftop chases into actual emotional connection, the kind where two people trust each other with things they'd never tell anyone else. And that relationship became the stabilizing force in her orbit. Batman gave her a reason to stay on the right side of the line, not because he demanded it, but because she genuinely wanted to be there. Which is, how healthy relationships are supposed to work. Someone should tell Bruce, what makes Catwoman's arc work where so many others fail is that she never pretended to be something she wasn't. She didn't put on a cape and start giving speeches about justice. She's still fundamentally self-centered, still governed by impulse in ways Batman would never allow himself to be. But she controls those impulses when it counts. When innocent lives are on the line, Catwoman shows up every time. Her current status reflects genuine stability. She appears consistently as someone Batman trusts implicitly with sensitive information and dangerous missions. She's not a reformed villain playing hero. She's just a better version of what she always was. A thief who decided the most valuable thing in Gotham wasn't in a jewelry case. But if you think Catwoman's redemption is impressive for how gradual it was, wait until you hear about the guy who went from career criminal to Justice League member overnight and somehow made it look easy. Plastic Man. Every character we've talked about so far has had some kind of asterisk next to their redemption. A relapse, A violent streak, a romantic entanglement pulling the strings, a biological compulsion threatening to undo everything. Plastic Man has 0 asterisks, none, and that's exactly why he's last on this list. Patrick Eel O'Brien was orphaned at 10 years old and thrown onto the streets of Gotham with absolutely nothing. No family, no safety net, no one coming to save him. So he did what a kid in that situation does. He survived. And survival in Gotham meant crime. Eel didn't just dabble either. He became one of the most skilled professional thieves and safecrackers in the entire city, earning genuine respect in Gotham's criminal underworld. This wasn't a guy who stumbled into crime because of one bad decision. This was a career, a decade-plus commitment to being very, very good at breaking the law. Then one job went sideways. During a heist, Eel was shot by law enforcement, and while bleeding out, he was exposed to an unidentified industrial chemical that entered his bloodstream through the open wound. His body underwent a full mutagenic transformation. Every cell essentially became rubber. He could stretch, flatten, expand, and mold himself into literally any shape imaginable, which is, not the typical Tuesday evening. But here's where Eel O'Brien separates himself from every single character we've covered today. Nobody made him become a hero. There was no Amanda Waller holding a bomb in his neck, no Batman extending a reluctant olive branch, no romantic partner whispering you could be better over candlelight, no ancient wizard, no government program. Eel just looked at his new abilities, looked at his old life, and made a decision. He put on a red and yellow rubber costume and started capturing criminals as Plastic Man. One man, one choice, 0 external pressure. And unlike basically everyone else on this list, he never looked back. Not once, not even a little. Plastic Man went on to serve in the Justice League, standing shoulder to shoulder with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. He appeared in the All-Star Squadron during the 1980s as the group's FBI liaison, which is a wild sentence to write about a former safecracker. Across decades of stories and multiple continuity reboots, Eel maintained unwavering heroic commitment, 0 desire to return to crime, 0 morally ambiguous vigilante phases, 0 dramatic relapses requiring a 6-issue redemption arc to fix. He just kept being a hero, every day. Here's the thing people miss about Plastic Man, though. Everyone focuses on the stretchy powers and the goofy personality, and yeah, he's funny. Genuinely one of the funniest characters in DC Comics. But that humor masks something most people don't expect. Eel O'Brien is smart, dangerously intelligent. He's a lateral thinker who approaches problems from angles that more traditionally brilliant heroes completely miss. And because he spent years embedded in Gotham's criminal underworld, he maintains thorough insight into criminal psychology that makes him an incredibly effective detective. Batman has deductive genius. Plastic Man has lived experience. Both get results. So after 7 characters with complicated redemptions, conditional heroism, biological compulsions, violent relapses, and moral gray areas the size of continents, Plastic Man stands as proof of something simple. The most permanent redemptions don't come from external force. They come from a person deciding on their own, with nobody watching and nothing to gain, that they want to be better. Eel O'Brien was a criminal. Then he wasn't, and he never went back. That's the most complete redemption in DC Comics. No asterisk required. Arkham Asylum has housed hundreds of inmates over the years, but only 8 of them truly matter. 8 permanent residents whose specific psychological fractures have turned Arkham into a revolving door instead of a hospital. Today, I'm breaking down every single one of them, what broke them, and why none of them will ever be fixed. Starting with the one who proved Arkham was doomed from the beginning, Jack Napier. Here's the thing about the Joker that nobody wants to admit. The chemicals didn't make him. They just gave him permission. Before Jack Napier ever fell into that vat at Axis Chemicals, he was already a predator. Narcissistic entitlement, instrumental manipulation, 0 empathy. Not reduced empathy, not struggling with empathy. 0. The guy operated through rigid black and white thinking where people were either completely useful to him or completely disposable. There was no middle ground. There was no nuance. You were a tool or you were a target, and he already felt exploited. Carl Grissom had been using him, and Napier knew it. The resentment was already there. The vengeful ideation was already cooking. What the acid bath at Axis Chemicals actually did was function as a re-traumatizing event, one that didn't create his rage, but legitimized it. It gave him the psychological permission slip to become what he'd always been underneath the cheap suit and the middle management smile. Jack is dead. Call me Joker. That line isn't just theatrical. It's a narcissistic rebirth. His identity isn't something he carries around internally like a normal person. It's something he performs continuously. He needs the stage, the audience, the the feedback loop. And Arkham, whether it realizes it or not, provides all three. But here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. Through repeated exposure to his own violence, through every escape and every escalation, Napier has habituated to physical pain and the fear of lethal self-harm. Each incarceration gives him data. Each breakout refines his methods. It's a ratcheting effect that only goes in one direction. Up every time Arkham puts him back in his cell. They're not containing him, they're reloading him. Inmate 0801, one of Arkham's earliest residents, one of its most enduring, and the living proof that this place was never built to cure anyone. But Napier's narcissism is a personality disorder. What happens when the fracture isn't in the personality itself, but in the literal structure of someone's identity? Harvey Dent. Most people think Two-Face has a clean clinical diagnosis. He doesn't. Harvey Dent's condition is never neatly labeled in the comics. It's portrayed as a trauma-induced split personality, sometimes leaning toward psychosis, sometimes toward dissociation, but always rooted in something deeply broken. Two entirely different personas fighting over one body. Harvey's father, Willis Dent, was an abusive alcoholic, and Willis had a ritual. He'd flip a coin to decide whether or not to beat his son. Heads, Harvey gets hit. Tails, he doesn't. That coin toss ritual didn't start with Two-Face. It started with a terrified child who had zero control over whether tonight was a good night or a bad one. Here's where it gets genuinely heartbreaking. Harvey's mind did what any child's mind would do under sustained abuse. It split. The evil alter, the one that would eventually become Two-Face, was constructed as a protective mechanism. Its entire purpose was to absorb the beatings so the original Harvey identity could survive psychologically intact. That's why Harvey Dent, the district attorney, was so good at his job. He was Gotham's White Knight because someone else was carrying all the damage for him. But that protector persona spent decades soaking up rage with nowhere to put it. It grew bitter, resentful, and eventually, all that accumulated fury turned outward toward the world that let it happen. And the coin, not just a quirky villain gimmick, it's a ritualized mechanism that maintains the separation between Harvey's two sides by attributing every decision to chance instead of unified personal choice. Every single flip prevents the integration that treatment actually requires. The thing that defines him is the exact thing keeping him sick, which is, not ideal. On top of all this, Harvey has developed obsessive-compulsive features centered entirely around the number 2 and the concept of duality. Everything has to be split in half. Outfits, hideouts, plans. It's compulsive reinforcement layered directly on top of the fractured psyche, making the whole thing exponentially harder to treat. And Arkham's approach? They treat him as one unified criminal entity responsible for his actions. Meanwhile, the legal system needs to identify the criminal and the victim within Dent, which actually validates the exact split framework generating his behavior in the first place. The institution designed to fix him is structurally incapable of addressing what's actually broken. Harvey Dent's entire criminal identity is an unconscious recreation of his childhood trauma. The coin, the splitting, the duality, all of it traces back to an abusive father and a little kid who never got to choose what happened to him. But if you think that's a dark origin story, wait until you hear about the man who decided to become fear itself. Jonathan Crane, the man who weaponized fear, can no longer feel it himself. Let that sink in for a second, because that single fact explains everything about why Jonathan Crane is one of the most dangerous people in Arkham and why nobody there can fix him. Here's the thing about Crane. He's not some lunatic who stumbled into chemistry. He's a legitimate psychologist with genuine expertise in neuropharmacology and toxicology. He understands fear better than almost anyone alive. The problem is that understanding didn't come from curiosity. It came from pain. Crane was bullied relentlessly as a kid, taunted and tormented until fear became the defining experience of his entire childhood. And instead of processing that trauma, instead of developing any kind of therapeutic insight, he did something far worse. He flipped it. He decided that if fear was going to define his life, he'd be the one holding the syringe. His fear toxin is a panicogenic chemical that essentially reaches into your brain, finds the thing you're most terrified of, and makes you hallucinate it in vivid, screaming detail. Every successful batch he cooks up gives him two things simultaneously: the intellectual thrill of a hypothesis confirmed, and the emotional satisfaction of watching someone else suffer the way he once did. Victims aren't people to him. They're data points. Their screaming is peer review. But here's where it gets gets complicated. Years of exposure to his own toxin have gradually burned out his fear response entirely. Crane literally cannot feel afraid anymore, and you'd think that would make him less dangerous. But it does the exact opposite. Fear is the thing that stops normal people from doing catastrophically stupid things. That little voice saying, hey, maybe don't has been chemically silenced in Crane's brain. He's reckless in a way that only someone incapable of self-preservation instinct can be. The one exception? Batman, the only living person who can still make Jonathan Crane feel genuine terror despite all that chemical habituation, which creates possibly the cruelest paradox in all of Arkham. The one relationship that could theoretically interrupt his pattern, the one person capable of producing the emotional response his treatment would require, exists exclusively as his criminal adversary. You can't build a therapeutic alliance with someone who keeps punching you through walls, and when another inmate finally dosed him with a concentrated blast of his own toxin, it shattered him. Full acute panic, complete psychological breakdown. You'd think that would be the breakthrough moment. Turns out, no. Even that couldn't produce lasting change. His brilliance validates his pathology. His pathology fuels his brilliance, and the whole thing spins in a circle that Arkham has zero tools to interrupt. He destroyed his own ability to be afraid, and it made him worse. But at least Crane's trap is chemical. The next inmate on our list is stuck in a prison built entirely out of his own intelligence, and he can't stop himself from locking the door. Edward Nygma. Most people think the Riddler is just an annoying guy who can't stop telling bad jokes in question form. He's the villain you sigh at, the one who feels like a downgrade after fighting literally anyone else. But Edward Nygma is dealing with something genuinely brutal, and once you understand it, you'll never look at him the same way again. Nygma displays textbook compulsive behavior, not the I like my desk organized kind that people joke about. Genuine, deeply rooted compulsion, an overwhelming psychological need to prove his intellectual superiority that he cannot consciously override, even though he recognizes it's completely self-destructive. That's the part that makes his condition so uniquely cruel. He knows. He knows leaving clues for Batman is self-defeating. He knows the riddles are going to get him caught. He understands, on an intellectual level, that everything he's doing is stupid, and he cannot stop. His compulsions have crystallized specifically around games, puzzles, and riddles. He experiences genuine psychological distress, real crushing anxiety, until he engages in those behaviors. In his case, that means planning elaborate crimes structured entirely around riddling patterns and leaving breadcrumbs for the one guy guaranteed to follow them. The compulsions temporarily satisfy his need to feel superior. He feels relief, and then the drive regenerates, and the whole thing starts over. DC writers have consistently portrayed this as an exhausting, inescapable loop, which is about the most polite way you could possibly describe a living nightmare. Here's where it gets worse. His compulsive need hasn't stayed contained. It's spread like a wildfire into his entire relationship with logic, control, and predictability. His need to create puzzles Batman can't solve in time isn't intellectual ambition. It's a coping mechanism. He needs specific outputs to regulate his internal emotional state. Without them, he's drowning. And Arkham's response to all of this is to lock him in a cell where he can't engage in any compulsive behaviors. Which sounds reasonable until you realize they're also not providing any meaningful psychiatric treatment. That's kind of Arkham's whole thing. So he's just sitting there, in constant, unrelenting psychological tension. No outlet, no treatment, just a man who knows exactly what's wrong with him and has zero ability to fix it. Every single day in that cell wins the spring tighter. Then he escapes, and the second he starts riddling again, the tension drops. Sweet relief. Which means his brain now has even stronger evidence that crime equals calm. Each escape reinforces the cycle. Each return to Arkham makes it worse. The institution isn't treating him. It's actively manufacturing a more compulsive criminal. His disorder is so deeply integrated into his sense of self that recovery would require him to abandon his entire identity. He literally cannot separate who he is from what compels him. Edward Nygma and the Riddler aren't two things anymore. They're the same thing. And nobody at Arkham has the tools, or apparently the interest, to do anything about it. But at least Nygma's prison is inside his own mind. The next inmate built his around someone else entirely. Victor Fries. Every inmate we've talked about so far has something fundamentally broken inside them. Some flaw in their personality. Some fracture in their identity. Victor Fries is different. Victor Fries was a good man, and honestly, that's what makes his story the worst one on this list. His wife Nora was diagnosed with Huntington's chorea, a progressive, degenerative disease with zero cure. Watching the person you love most in the world slowly deteriorate while medical science shrugs its shoulders. That's the starting point, not a chemical vat or a childhood trauma or a coin flip, a husband who loved his wife and refused to let her die. So Victor did what any brilliant cryogenicist would do. He placed Nora in cryogenic stasis to buy time while he searched for a cure. Then he went to his employer, GothCorp CEO Ferris Boyle, and begged for resources to continue his research. Boyle didn't just say no. He had Victor physically thrown out of the facility. And then, because apparently refusing a dying woman's last hope wasn't enough for one afternoon, he had Nora's cryogenic pod destroyed. Let that sit for a second. A corporate executive looked at a man trying to save his wife's life and decided the appropriate response was to destroy the only thing keeping her alive. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. The accident that followed transformed Victor's body into something that could only survive at sub-zero temperatures, trapping him permanently inside a refrigerated suit. But the real damage was already done. Every heist, every frozen city block, every confrontation with Batman traces back to one conviction. Nora can still be saved, and nothing else matters until she is. Here's the thing that separates Fries from everyone else in Arkham. His criminal behavior isn't the product of delusion or personality disorder. It's love filtered through grief, filtered through genius-level scientific capability. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows it's illegal. He understands all of it with perfect clarity and does it anyway, because in his mind, his wife's life outweighs everything. And that's precisely why Arkham can't touch him. You can't give someone insight into a condition when they already have more insight than their therapists do. Fries doesn't need to understand why he commits crimes. He could write the clinical paper himself. What he needs is for Nora to be cured, and that is something no psychiatric institution on Earth can provide. Her actual status, frozen, possibly brain dead, possibly beyond recovery, remains permanently unresolved, which means his obsession has no off switch. There's no medication, no talk therapy that addresses the core problem, because the core problem is a woman suspended between life and death in a pod somewhere. Every single day Fries spends in Arkham is not treatment. It's active psychological torture. You've taken a grieving husband, locked him in a cell, and told him you're helping. Meanwhile, the institution stamps treatment ongoing on his file like that means something. For Victor Fries, Arkham might be the cruelest thing Gotham has ever done to anyone. The other inmates are fighting their own broken minds. Fries is fighting reality itself, and reality isn't losing. But if you think a man driven mad by love is tragic, wait until you meet the woman who replaced love with something else entirely. Pamela Isley. Here's the thing about Poison Ivy that nobody wants to sit with for too long. She's not crazy, she's not irrational, she's not even wrong about most of her premises, and that's exactly what makes her one of the most terrifying inmates in Arkham. Pamela Isley was a botanist before she was anything else. A scientific accident during experimentation fundamentally rewired her biology from the ground up. Chlorophyll replaced her blood, her touch became toxic, and her body developed the ability to secrete pheromones capable of bending the will of anyone nearby, men and women alike. So on paper, she's a metahuman threat with biochemical weapons built into her skin. But that's not the incurable part. The incurable part is the worldview. Isley doesn't just dislike humanity. She has constructed an entirely coherent philosophical framework in which human extinction is a moral good. Plants are the only life forms deserving of protection, care, and love. Humans are parasites, destroyers, a species so fundamentally corrupt that removing them from the equation isn't murder, it's environmental cleanup. And here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. She hasn't lost the ability to love. She loves deeply. She nurtures. She protects. She grieves. She just directs all of that toward botanical life and absolutely zero of it toward people. This isn't a woman missing empathy. This is a woman who rebuilt her entire emotional architecture around a different kingdom of life. But the real nightmare is the pheromone feedback loop. Every single time Ivy mind controls a human being, it confirms everything she already believes. If she can override someone's free will with a chemical secretion, then humans aren't autonomous agents. They're biological puppets, meat that responds to the right stimulus, which means they don't deserve moral consideration, which means using them as disposable tools is perfectly justified. Her power literally proves her ideology to her in real time. Every successful manipulation is another data point in a thesis she's been writing since the accident. And Arkham? Arkham is stuck in the most impossible bind imaginable. They can't house her securely while giving her access to plant life, because plant life is the source of her power, but they also can't separate her from plants without essentially torturing someone whose entire identity is built around protecting them. They could use herbicide to weaken her. She's extremely susceptible to it. But think about what that communicates to a woman who already believes humanity is a plague on the natural world. Hey, Pamela, we're going to poison the thing you love most to keep you compliant. That's not treatment. That's confirming every single thing she's ever said about the human species. A therapist trying to restore her empathy for humans isn't fighting delusion. They're fighting a logically consistent worldview built on premises that no amount of talk therapy can dislodge. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't arrive at through broken reasoning. Her reasoning works perfectly. It just starts from a place where photosynthesis matters more than people, which is, not ideal. But if you think a woman who replaced her blood with chlorophyll is hard to treat, wait until you meet the inmate whose own body is the disease. Waylon Jones. Waylon Jones didn't choose to become a monster. Everybody else made that decision for him. Jones was born with a rare genetic condition, a form of atavism that produced progressive physical disfigurements, green scaly skin, a body that deviated further from anything resembling human with every passing year. His family abandoned him. He was raised by an alcoholic aunt, who abused him relentlessly. Every single person Jones encountered during his formative years rejected him, not because of anything he did, but because of what he looked like. Here's the thing. Despite all of that, Jones actually found something resembling a place in the world. He ended up working as a sideshow attraction and carnival wrestler. It wasn't dignity exactly, but it was the closest thing to acceptance he'd ever experienced. He had a function, and nobody was beating him for existing. And then it fell apart. The carnival circuit dried up. Legitimate work was never going to happen for a man who looked like a 7-foot reptile, and the only people willing to give him opportunity were criminals who saw his size and his skin as assets. So Jones did exactly what you'd expect after a lifetime of being called a monster with zero alternatives on the table. He became the monster. He stopped fighting against the animal characteristics of his condition and started embracing them. He developed cannibalistic urges. He began identifying not as a man with a condition, but as a predator surrounded by prey, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets genuinely horrifying. Jones's condition is progressive. It doesn't plateau. Every year his body becomes less human. His skeletal structure shifts, his skin thickens, his cognitive patterns drift towards something reptilian. He's not choosing to become more of a monster. His own biology is dragging him there whether he wants it or not, and there is zero off switch. This creates an impossible clinical situation. His physical pathology is so intertwined with his psychological pathology that you can't treat one without addressing the other. But Arkham's psychiatrists can't stop genetic expression or slow progressive mutation. They can talk to him about his trauma all day long, but his cells don't care how he feels. His cannibalistic practices aren't random violence. They're ritualized predation, a confirmation of the identity that humanity forced onto him. He eats people because he's a monster, and he's a monster because every human he ever met told him so until he stopped disagreeing. Arkham doesn't exist to heal Waylon Jones. It exists to contain him, and the containment itself, the violent recaptures, the dehumanizing conditions, all of it reinforces his belief that he is nothing more than an animal to be caged. The institution designed to help him is confirming everything the world already taught him. He's the most tragic figure in that entire building, not because of what he's done, but because of what was done to him. Every step of his life was a reaction to how humanity treated someone who committed the unforgivable crime of being born different. But if Jones represents what happens when the world creates its own monster, the next inmate proves you don't need a genetic mutation or a tragic backstory to become completely, obsessively unhinged. Sometimes all you need is a calendar. Julian Day. Most of the inmates on this list are dangerous because of what they can do. Julian Day is dangerous because of what he can't stop thinking about. Calendar Man is obsessed with dates, not in a quirky, oh, he likes birthdays kind of way. Every single crime he commits is meticulously structured around the specific date it happens. Holidays, anniversaries, historical events, equinoxes. If the date has significance, Day has already mapped a murder onto it. His real name is literally a pun on the Julian and Gregorian calendars, which tells you everything you need to know about how deep this goes. Here's where his story goes from weird to genuinely hopeless. His entire psychological identity is fused to the calendar itself. He's been shown waiting patiently in his cell, not because he's given up, but because the right date hasn't arrived yet. He's not idle, he's counting down. Whatever compulsion drives him has completely consumed every other aspect of his personality, and nothing Arkham has thrown at him has made the slightest dent. And this is what makes him the perfect final entry on this list. Compare him to someone like Nigma. Nigma's obsessions at least have an intellectual dimension. You could theoretically redirect that brain toward legitimate problem solving. It would be extraordinarily difficult, but there's a sliver of a pathway. Day has no such pathway. Dates aren't puzzles you can solve. They're not fears you can desensitize. They're not personalities you can integrate. They are the passage of time itself. You cannot remove a human being from the existence of calendars. Arkham can take away his weapons. They can take away his contact with other inmates. They can put him in the most secure cell in the entire facility, but they cannot stop Tuesday from becoming Wednesday. They cannot prevent Christmas from arriving. They cannot make July 4th not exist. His triggers are literally woven into the fabric of reality, which is, not ideal from a treatment standpoint. Right now, as you're watching this, Julian Day is sitting in a cell somewhere in Arkham, fully aware of today's date, running calculations on what it means, what crime it could correspond to. He's planning for dates that won't arrive for years, and Arkham can do absolutely nothing about it except keep the door locked and hope for the best. And that's the thing about all 8 of these inmates. Napier's narcissism feeds on the institution that contains him. Dense dissociation is reinforced by the legal system that judges him. Crane's fear research requires victims Arkham can't provide, but also can't make him stop wanting. Nigma's compulsions worsen in the exact environment designed to suppress them. Fry's grief can't be resolved without resurrecting his wife. Isley's ideology is confirmed every time a human tries to control her. Jones's body literally becomes more monstrous the longer he's locked up, and Day can't be separated from time itself. These 8 don't prove that Arkham is broken. They prove that Arkham was never built to fix what's wrong with them. The institution was designed to contain, not to cure. And for these 8, containment isn't treatment. It's just a stage. The revolving door isn't a bug. It's the only possible outcome when you try to cage conditions that were never meant to fit inside walls. Arkham will always be full, because the things that keep these 8 coming back can't be medicated, can't be therapized, and can't be locked out. They're already inside. The most famous villain origin in comics might be completely fake. The Joker himself admits in The Killing Joke that if he must have a past, he prefers it multiple choice. Every time you think you've pinned him down, the story changes. And that's not an accident. That's the entire point. Today I'm breaking down every single major DC villain origin, from the deliberate chaos of the Joker to evolutionary freaks that shouldn't exist, starting with the clown who made uncertainty a superpower, the Joker. The Red Hood backstory first appeared in Detective Comics that was 168 in 1951. A lab worker turns to crime, gets chased by Batman, falls into a vat of chemicals, and emerges bleached white with a permanent grin. Simple, clean, horrifying. But it wasn't until Alan Moore's The Killing Joke in 1988 that it became the cultural monument it is today. Moore's version gives us a failed comedian crushed by poverty and the death of his pregnant wife, who reluctantly joins a heist as the Red Hood just to pay his bills. The chemicals change his face. Grief and desperation create the Joker. The vat just makes it visible. Here's the thing. The chemicals alter his appearance. His interpretation of what happened is what makes him the Joker. He looks at his ruined face and his dead wife and decides the only rational response is to become the punchline of a cosmic joke. It's a choice, even if he tells you it isn't. But here's where it gets weird. The Joker himself undercuts the whole story. He admits his memory is unreliable, that maybe he had a different past yesterday. Later stories like Three Jokers suggest multiple people may have become the Joker at different times, and The Dark Knight had him tell mutually incompatible scar stories to different people in the same film. The moment you think you understand him, he slips away. A villain who can't be pinned down can't be beaten by understanding him, which is honestly pretty tame compared to a man whose entire supervillainy runs on jealousy and a god complex. Lex Luthor. Most villains on this list have an accident, a chemical bath, a lab explosion, a curse that ruins their life in seconds. Lex Luthor has none of that. He becomes a villain through a long series of deliberate choices, proving that in the DC universe, human hubris alone is enough to be the world's greatest threat. Introduced in 1940 as a bald mad scientist, Lex was reimagined after Crisis on Infinite Earths into something far scarier, a billionaire corporate titan whose wealth makes him as untouchable as any god. No freak accident gave him power. He built it. He climbed his way to the top through ruthless intelligence, political manipulation, and and zero ethical limits. And then he turned all of that against Superman. Here's the thing. Lex's hatred of Superman isn't personal in the petty sense. It's ideological. An alien, someone not one of us, commands unparalleled power and public adoration. And Lex frames his entire crusade as defending human self-determination from dependency on a godlike extraterrestrial. On paper, that argument isn't entirely irrational, which is what makes him compelling. Humanity placing all its faith in an invincible alien could be dangerous, but Lex's behavior consistently reveals the real motive is personal vanity and an inability to accept that someone else could be superior. The hero is the alien. The villain is the human. This structural flip is unique on this list and forces the question of whether Superman's goodness makes Lex's resentment understandable or simply exposes it as envy. And the answer, every single time, is envy. Lex doesn't want humanity to be free. He wants to be the one they look up to. Unlike the Joker, there's no pivotal night that breaks Lex. No chemical vat, no dramatic tragedy, just a man who keeps choosing to be the worst version of himself. Whether he's the corporate tycoon or the mad scientist depends on the era you're living in, but the constants never change. Human supremacy, hyperintelligence misapplied, and an ideological war against a benevolent god he refuses to trust. But if you think one man's ego is dangerous, wait until you meet the villain who was literally born into hell. Bane, a man sentenced to prison before he was even born. That's not hyperbole. Bane's father was a revolutionary who fled Santa Prisca to escape punishment, and the corrupt regime decided that since the father couldn't be caught, his unborn child would serve the life sentence instead. So Bane literally grows up inside Peña Duro, one of the most brutal prisons on the planet, surrounded by hardened criminals from infancy. And here's the thing, he doesn't just survive. He teaches himself to read, trains his body relentlessly, and by adulthood has murdered his first man and become the de facto ruler of the prison's internal hierarchy. Before any drugs, before any enhancements, just raw discipline and intelligence forged in hell. Then the biochemical shift arrives. Prison authorities select him as a test subject for Venom, a super steroid that has killed every previous candidate. They pump the experimental compound directly into his brain and spine. He survives, gains extraordinary strength, but the cost is permanent dependency administered through tubes connected to his central nervous system. The power is real, but it's also a leash. Having heard stories of Gotham from fellow inmates, Bane engineers the Arkham mass breakout in the Nightfall storyline, deliberately exhausting Batman by forcing him to recapture every major villain over weeks of sleepless nights. Then, when Batman is physically and mentally broken, Bane walks into the Batcave and snaps his spine over his knee. No gadgets, no plan B, just the unbreakable man, broken. The anti-Bruce Wayne parallel is almost too clean, both shaped by early violence, both forged into peak human beings through pure discipline. But Bruce inherits wealth and channels trauma into protecting others, while Bane inherits a prison sentence and channels pain into domination. He's one of the few villains who beats Batman by playing Batman's own game. Preparation, intelligence, physical superiority. The difference is Bruce has moral hesitation. Bane has none. Bane marks the exact transition point in the origin spectrum. Purely human suffering that crosses into biochemical enhancement. The hinge between the psychological and the scientific. At least he chose to become what he is, unlike the next one on this list. Harley Quinn. This is the one that could actually happen. No chemicals, no alien tech, no ancient curse. Just a psychiatrist who thought she could help someone, and a patient who weaponized her empathy like a scalpel. Dr. Harleen Quinzel was qualified, competent, and academically accomplished when she arrived at Arkham Asylum. She specifically requested permission to treat the Joker because she believed she could study him, understand him, and ultimately cure him. That professional confidence is exactly what made her vulnerable. The Joker didn't break her in a day. He dismantled her over months. He presented himself as a misunderstood victim of a cruel world, deployed false vulnerability with surgical precision, and feigned intimacy until the boundaries between doctor and patient dissolved entirely. She fell in love with the man she was hired to cure, which is exactly what he engineered. Unlike every other villain on this list, her transformation required no vat, no lab accident, no radioactive spider. It was prolonged psychological grooming and the slow erosion of identity, which makes it the most realistic and disturbing origin in this entire video. Her fall is not about naivety. She holds a doctorate, she understands manipulation tactics and theory, but she underestimates her own vulnerability, overestimates her ability to control the Joker, and misreads his performed pain as genuine remorse. By the time she realizes what's happening, she's already rewritten her sense of self around him. She breaks him out of Arkham, adopts the name Harley Quinn, and reinvents herself as his acrobatic, chaotic chaotic partner in crime. Her entire identity is built around pleasing him, which is the entire problem. But here's where it gets complicated. Post-rebirth, Harley gradually recognizes the abuse and strikes out on her own, joining the Suicide Squad and operating as an anti-hero. She's the only villain on this list whose arc explicitly involves recovering a self that was stolen. The Batman mirror works differently here. Both Bruce and Harley construct new identities through costumes, codenames, and theatricality after trauma. But Bruce does it to fight crime, and Harley does it initially to please her abuser, then eventually to reclaim herself. Fan debates about her culpability are genuinely unresolved. Some argue she's a victim who was effectively brainwashed. Others point out she's an educated professional who knowingly violated ethics and participated in violent crimes long after understanding the Joker's nature. There's no clean answer, which is part of what makes her compelling. She's proof that you don't need cosmic intervention to destroy someone. You just need access and time. At least Harley eventually gets out. Mr. Freeze never does, because his tragedy is literally frozen in place forever. Mr. Freeze. After 4 origins grounded in psychology, abuse, ideology, and human choice, we've hit the first one where a single laboratory accident is the literal point of no return. Victor Freeze didn't choose to become Mr. Freeze. He was made. And here's the thing nobody talks about. His definitive origin wasn't even created in the comics. It was written by Paul Dini for Batman, the animated series episode Heart of Ice in 1992. And it was so acclaimed that DC later imported it wholesale into mainstream comic continuity. A cartoon episode so good it became canon. Victor is a brilliant cryogenicist whose wife Nora is terminally ill. Desperate to save her, he secretly uses corporate lab resources to place her in cryogenic suspension, hoping to find a cure. When his employer orders the project shut down, a confrontation leads to an accident exposing Victor to experimental cryogenic chemicals. The explosion permanently alters his physiology, so his body can no longer survive outside sub-zero temperatures. He must live inside a refrigerated suit at all times. Presumed dead, he returns to take revenge on everyone who destroyed his chance to save Nora. The physical freezing is inseparable from the emotional freezing. Victor shuts himself off from all feeling to survive the pain of her loss, even as everything he does is driven by his inability to let her go. Love and numbness occupying the exact same body. The suit keeps him alive. The mission keeps him functional. Neither one lets him heal. Then DC decided to mess with it. A New 52 retcon revealed that Nora was never actually Victor's wife. She was a woman from the 1940s whose cryogenically preserved body he became obsessed with, reframing his entire tragedy as a delusion. Fans largely rejected this as cheapening one of DC's most emotionally powerful origin stories. Add that to the list of unnecessary retcons nobody asked for. The Batman mirror is precise. Both men lose loved ones and channel that loss into obsessive, highly technical missions. But where Bruce builds connections over time, Victor's world collapses into a single fixed point. He freezes in place, literally and metaphorically, while Bruce keeps moving forward. Mr. Freeze is the clearest answer to what Bruce Wayne might have become if grief had consumed him entirely, instead of fueling something larger. At least Victor's obsession was rooted in love. But if you think freezing your wife to cheat death is morally complicated, wait until you hear about the man who turned his father's death into a blood vendetta involving advanced military technology and a bug-eyed helmet, Black Manta. Aquaman technically made the right call, and it destroyed him. Here's what happened. In the DCEU film Aquaman, David and his father are pirates hijacking a submarine. Aquaman shows up, stops them, and during the fight, an explosion traps David's father underwater. David begs Aquaman to save him. Aquaman refuses. His exact reasoning: these men killed innocents, and they need to face the consequences of their actions. He leaves them both behind to die. David's father, knowing he won't survive, tells his son to live and seek revenge. Then he kills himself with his own explosive to free David from the wreckage. That's the origin. A hero making a morally defensible choice that directly creates his most personal enemy. Black Manta debuted in Aquaman number 35 in September 1967 and became Aquaman's arch enemy almost immediately. Bug-eyed helmet, black wetsuit, advanced weapons, zero chill. His civilian identity and backstory have shifted across continuities, but the core motivation stays the same. He hates Aquaman on a deeply personal level. Some comic origins depict him as a child kidnapped and abused aboard a ship, calling out for help as Aquaman swam nearby and was ignored. That version frames the vendetta as abandonment rather than villainy. The DCEU version is cleaner and more brutal, because Aquaman isn't ignoring a random kid. He's making a conscious moral judgment that pirates who murder people don't deserve rescue, and that judgment becomes the fuel for one of DC's most relentless vendettas. The structural mirror here is sharp. Aquaman is half human, half Atlantean, torn between two worlds, with innate mystical power rooted in royal lineage. Black Manta is fully human, obsessed with sea-based warfare, and every advantage he has is built through technology, training, and tactical cunning. He forces his way into a world that was never his, because the king of that world let his father die. In the comics, Manta's vendetta escalates to the killing of Aquaman's infant son. That's not a power play or a world domination scheme. That's revenge so personal it rewrites the entire relationship between hero and villain into something Aquaman can never emotionally escape. Black Manta's story also carries ongoing thematic weight as one of DC's prominent black villains, with some storylines engaging racial and social dimensions, including experiences of oppression that inform his resentment of Atlantis. These threads are unevenly explored across different eras, but when they're present, they add another layer to the vendetta, because it's not just about one man's grief, it's about systemic exclusion, about being denied access to power and then watching someone with inherited authority decide your father isn't worth saving. Aquaman wasn't wrong, but if you think moral righteousness protects you from consequences, wait until you meet the woman who made a deal with a god and got cursed for her trouble. Cheetah. Several people have worn the Cheetah name over the decades, but there's really only one version anyone talks about. Barbara Ann Minerva, introduced in Wonder Woman Volume 7 back in August 1987. Before everything went wrong, Barbara was a brilliant British archaeologist, an heiress, and someone genuinely obsessed with ancient mythology and lost civilizations. Her academic credentials were solid. Her adventurous streak could have made her Wonder Woman's ally in another story, but she was defined by loneliness, a sense of exclusion from the divine connections she spent her life studying, and a hunger for transcendence that made her vulnerable to a very specific temptation. The transformation centers on a ritual involving a plant god called Kartaga. Barbara expected to become a powerful immortal guardian, the kind of figure she'd read about in all those ancient texts. Instead, because the sacrifice wasn't performed under the correct conditions, the ceremony produced a curse rather than a blessing. The ritual granted her superhuman strength, agility, razor-sharp claws, durability, and in some versions, a venomous bite capable of transforming others into similar creatures. But the cost was constant physical pain, insatiable hunger, and a psychological destabilization that amplified every resentment she'd ever had. Here's where it gets dark. Her only partial relief from the suffering comes when she surrenders to the bloodlust. Violence becomes both the symptom and the only temporary treatment, trapping her in a predatory identity she never intended to inhabit. She wanted to be chosen by the gods. Instead, she became a tool for one. The DC Rebirth run deepened the tragedy by reframing Barbara as someone who had a genuine friendship with Diana before the curse, a brilliant peer who helped bring Diana into the modern world. Now every battle between them is a confrontation with a person Diana once cared for, and Barbara's rage is as much about betrayal and feeling unchosen by the gods as it is about raw power. Diana's abilities are innate, granted through a coherent system of duty and love, and she uses them to protect others. Barbara acquired hers through a desperate, individualistic pact that severed her from community and bound her to a capricious god who was using her as a tool all along. Barbara's origin functions as a critique of extractive approaches to sacred knowledge, an outsider archaeologist who seeks to appropriate mystical power from an ancient source is consumed rather than enlightened, with her expertise becoming the very thing that led her to a ritual she was never meant to survive. The transformation was voluntary. The outcome was not. But if you think being cursed by a god is disturbing, wait until you hear about the telepathic gorilla who decided humanity was beneath him. Gorilla Grodd. After 7 human-adjacent origins, we now arrive at a telepathic gorilla with psychic powers who wants to enslave humanity. And yes, I know how that sounds, but Grodd is legitimately one of the most terrifying villains in DC's entire roster, and his origin is categorically different from everyone else on this list because it has almost nothing to do with human tragedy, human choices, or human mistakes. Created by John Broome and Carmine Infantino, Grodd first appeared in The Flash, Number 106 in 1959. An alien spaceship crashes near a gorilla community in Africa. The strange energies it emits uplift the entire group into sapient beings with advanced intelligence and psychic powers. Grodd emerges as the most powerful and ambitious among them, possessing telepathy, telekinesis, and physical strength far beyond an ordinary gorilla. Nobody chose this. Nobody caused it. It just happened. His psionic abilities define his identity as a villain. He can control minds, project mental force beams, and in later stories absorb intelligence by consuming human brains. Read that again. He gains knowledge by eating your brain. That means Grodd combines brute physical dominance with invisible psychic warfare simultaneously, which is a nightmare combination that very few heroes can counter effectively. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Gorilla City, the hidden advanced civilization where Grodd originates, is crucial context. His peers chose peace and isolation. They built a utopia. Grodd is not representative of his species. He is the exception, not the rule. That makes him more frightening because it means his evil is a choice within a society that chose otherwise. The same cosmic accident that gave his people enlightenment gave him megalomania. He didn't fall into chemicals. He didn't lose a loved one. He wasn't experimented on. The universe simply handed him power, and he chose domination. The Flash mirror is the cleanest one in this entire video. Barry Allen uses speed in defense of others. Grodd uses mental power not to expand possibilities, but to constrict them, overriding free will and imposing his consciousness onto others. Speed is liberation versus telepathy as enslavement. That's the whole fight. Taken together, all 8 of these origins reveal the same underlying truth. DC's greatest villains are not people who were born wrong. They were broken, betrayed, manipulated, cursed, or uplifted by a universe that doesn't hand out justice equally. The heroes get the same universe and make different choices. That's the whole game. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now